Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
Empathy isn't just a soft skill, it's a leadership superpower. Today's guest has spent more than 30 years leading complex projects and developing project management teams, and he believes that success begins with understanding people as much as process. Hi, I'm Gino Degregori, and welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. Our guest today, Joe Launi, is the project manager expert with over 30 years of experience building high-performing teams and delivering successful projects. He is the founder of Project Management Experts, LLC, a sought-after trainer and published author in project planning, software implementations, and team motivation. Joe is passionate about the role of empathy in leadership, how understanding and connecting with your people can transform morale, engagement, and project outcome. Super excited to have you, Joe. Welcome. So to start off, could you share a little bit about your journey and how you've gone this far?
Well, sure. I've been in project management. You said 30 years. It's actually been a little bit longer. It's closer to 40 now in capacity.
Gotcha.
As I started managing projects for some big firms in the DC area. And then it was probably in the 90s, I really got interested in best practices, started running or working in or leading project management offices, PMOs, really enjoyed that. But it was in 2007, really 5, I started the company as an independent consultant, but really 2007, I really wanted to do this full time. I wanted to grow something, take ownership of something, and training. Training is a great last career. This is the last career for me. I'm ready to retire. I've been doing this. I've had the company now almost 20 years. So I'm ready to pass it on. But it's been a great last job where you can take your experience over a career and pass it off to people that are hoping to get PMP certified, trying to learn and get into project management, trying to learn new skills, whether it be leadership or project management or agile. So it's a great way to conclude a career. At least that's what it is for me. It's a great way to pass on the things that I've learned to people that also need to learn it. And maybe we can ease the pain a little bit for them as they go in and learn their own lessons about project management.
Absolutely.
So I've been doing this for a while. I really enjoy it. And we do a lot of teaching in fundamentals, PMP prep, agile, and leadership as well. We teach some leadership courses.
Absolutely.
I'm a big proponent of servant leadership, which drew me to your podcast because I think we're talking on the same language, and let's see where it goes.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on all your success and, having a company for a while too. I've been in the similar, actually started this company that I run 17 years ago, which is 2007. So not too far off from where you've been. So it's been quite a journey for sure. Enjoy every minute. And good days, bad days, but we're moving in the right direction for sure. So one of the reasons I was really intrigued, and I think I signed up for your letter a while back, and sometime in May, I think I received a letter that the title was The Importance of Empathy in Leadership. And we'll definitely dive into that a little bit more. But before we dive into that, I would like to ask you, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
Well, in my mind, there's two types of leaders, in my view, and they're very bipolar. One leader is transactional. The other leader is transformational. And I would put, quote unquote, a kind leader as transformational. But let's talk about what a transactional leader is. Transactional leader basically looks at people as a means to an end, right? You've got to create a product. You've got to deliver a service. You've got to get the job done. And how do you do it? You get it done through people. And you see people. Now, I'm being very, very black and white here. There's a whole range in between these two. But a pure transactional leader almost looks at people as robots. They're robots to get a job done so the company can be profitable. and can make money in revenue. And there's many of those. There's a lot of nicknames for those: micromanagers, autocrats, right? Whatever name you want to attach to them. On the opposite end of the scale, which, I'd like to believe I fall, is more transformational. And this goes not only just for leadership, but business style and management style and corporate cultures. Transformational leader looks at the big picture. They look at people as not only a means to the end, but it's our responsibility as transformational leaders and kind leaders is to be concerned about where they're going to end up. Where are they personally going to be in their career? Are they adding value through my company in their career? Are they gaining the knowledge that they need? Because the fact of the matter is, people that I've worked with and for, and the people that have worked for me, they're not going to be with me forever, right? On average, people switch jobs, especially the younger people now. I mean, they're not going to stay where they're not comfortable. And how am I going to leave them? How are they going to leave me? Are they going to leave me better, or are they going to leave me discouraged and frustrated?
Right.
So a kind leader, a transformational leader, is thinking about how we can get these people prepared for the rest of their career. What training do they need? What education? What support do they need? Where's their interest? Am I providing them an environment that enriches them and their career? But it's also more than that. I mean, I think a transformational leader or a culture that is transformative is also considering, hey, am I creating great products and services? Am I delivering value that's a little bit greater than the revenue that I get from it? Everything from, am I creating quality? Am I paying taxes? This is the thing that most people don't like to talk about. Nobody likes to pay taxes, right? Matter of fact, tax day is September 15th. I'll be paying my taxes on Friday. And when you own a company, those dates. The tax is September 15th. So I think too many of us look at paying taxes traditionally taxes is an expense. It's an expense on our books. But we need to look at paying taxes, as an investment in our society, right? Because this society and this country has allowed you and me to do what we like, to do what we enjoy, to do what we are good at, and to support our families. That doesn't exist everywhere in the world. And we need to invest in our society. And that's what paying your taxes, I think, helps do that. Now, I think it's a fair argument to say, look, I don't like the way the government spends our taxes. Okay, fine. That's why we vote, right? And other things. Yeah. So that's all about being transformative. It's looking at the bigger picture of people, looking at process, looking at how you do things, how you relate to people, how you relate to your customers. Are your stockholders and shareholders getting a fair return, right? And it's much more than just making revenue and being profitable. Right. And a kind leader is transformative, in my view.
Well, thank you for that description or definition from your perspective. And I love the contrast there, right? The transactional and then transformational. And interestingly enough, I stumbled into those words like several years ago. And the other way I looked at it is scarcity mindset and growth mindset. When you have that scarcity mindset, everything is short term and what's in it for me, right? So that transactional leader is always going to be kind of thinking very selfishly, very internal, making decisions out of fear. Because if I give too much, they're going to go away. If I do this, things are going to happen, right? So that creates that negative mind where it's not conducive to a nice environment, right? An ecosystem where people can thrive. On the transformational side is that growth mindset to a lot of things that you've said, where people feel that they're becoming the better version of themselves. So what are we doing as entrepreneurs? What are we doing as leaders, right? To help your team be better. The minute they come into your organization, the minute they come into your team, are you helping them become a better version of themselves? Are you providing the training, the values, the direction, the mentorship, put all the different things in there, right? So to your point, like they come in, they learn, and then now they're better. And someday they'll remember, right? Hey, maybe they come back, right, in the future. That, but now they've experienced that in that organization where they know that leader, that kind leader, really took care of them, really changed their perspective and made an impact in their lives at the end of the day. So I love the definition and the contrast on those two, and very important as we're navigating through some times, right, that we're seeing
exactly.
right, in the world.
Exactly.
So coming back to the article you wrote, I'm not sure if you remember back in May, as it relates to the empathy, the importance of leading with empathy, you had different bullets and stuff like that. So you are talking about project management and project management tools, PMP and all that stuff. How important is empathy? I read the article, but how important is empathy from your perspective?
I think it's really important, especially if you're transformational. If you're transactional, it means nothing. If you're transactional, I've had leaders, I've had executives tell me, look, I don't care what you're thinking. I don't care what you're feeling. Here's the job, get it done. Right. And that's a leader that doesn't lead with empathy. But a leader that leads with empathy is saying to that person, to say you're in a one-on-one relationship, you're even in a conflict with a team member or an employee. Leading with empathy is being able to look that person in the eye and say, yeah, I understand what you're thinking. I understand what you're feeling. I get it. I get it. And especially if you're in an angry conflict, one of the best ways, I don't know if you've heard about the parent-child relationship. The parent-child in a business context, when somebody comes screaming at you in your office, and they're saying, look, I'm so frustrated with this company. I'm frustrated with this. And they're communicating as a child. And as a leader, we have to maintain that parent level. And when you maintain that parent level, and this is where empathy can help, then that person will start to rise up, in my experience. So in other words, hey, I'm fed up with this client, and you say to them, look, I understand. And you got to believe this. You can't just blow smoke here. You got to believe it. You got to say, look, hey, I understand you're frustrated. I hear you. I hear you, and I understand this is a difficult client. I know that. I know that whatever's happening with you is not working out. Then that person will start to rise because you're empathizing with them. And once you're at that parent-to-parent relationship in that conversation, now you're in a better position to get things done. You're in a better position through empathy to get to the root of the problem. Now, I'm not proposing that when somebody comes and they're really I'm not saying you have to necessarily agree. I don't think empathy means necessarily agree with them. It means you're making an effort to get on their page.
Yeah, to listen, right?
And then you're in a position to say, look, hey, Gino, look, I know you're upset here. I can hear it. Right. I get you. And I understand this is a difficult client. But here's how we together need to deal with this person. And if it means telling that person, look, you can't go into this client yelling and screaming, right? You can't behave that way. So sometimes you got to be kind of the actual parent and say, and lay some boundaries down with people. And I think that team member will start to rise up, and hopefully they'll adopt and get on the same page with you as they're dealing with this difficult situation. But it all starts with empathy. Right. And I've listened to, I forget who the general was, but somebody asked a general in the military, what is the best, most valuable leadership skill that you have found that works for you? And he said empathy. Being able to understand. You almost have to have that, And I've taught a lot of military soldiers. I spent 3 weeks in Europe, in Germany and Italy on bases. I've taught on bases in Colorado. And they will tell you, those guys will tell you, and women, will tell you that, hey, they follow servant leadership. The job of the leader is to serve the team, not necessarily the other way around.
Right. So let's pull on that thread real quick, because I'm curious. I've never been in the military. I respect the military folks, and our customers are in the military as well. But I've always felt with my limited interaction that the military is very hierarchical.
Yeah.
So everything is this level of respect on your titles, on the ranks. So there's not enough room potentially or that empathy, right? That connection, that trust. So please enlighten me with your perspective. And you were talking about, right, talking to a lot of these folks, right? So you see
Oh,
empathy in
yes.
this, in that,
Oh,
in
yeah.
that world?
Matter of fact,
Okay.
I've taught classes where, there was a colonel in the room, and then there's there's a staff sergeant in the room, all taking the same course. And if you didn't see their insignia, you would know who was what. you
Right.
You're right. There is a hierarchy. There is a top down, but it doesn't mean they talk down. They're just top down.
Yeah.
You go in the Pentagon and the generals absolutely expect the colonels for them to give advice, for them to give insight.
Right.
It's expected and they need it. They need to understand. And I think in my experience, the military understands that. I don't know if you ever heard the theory, the iceberg of ignorance.
No, yeah. Can you tell me
The
that?
iceberg of ignorance basically says that organizations are like icebergs. You only see the top. People that are in their boats, they only see the top of the iceberg, but there's a whole iceberg underneath it that's much bigger. The iceberg of ignorance says the executives in the organization don't even know 90% of what's happening below the iceberg. It's the people doing the job, doing the work, interacting with the customers, interacting with the issues. They understand what's happening.
Okay.
And the executives at the top are only getting a snapshot. If anything, they're only getting and understanding 10% of what's happening below them. So a transactional leader or an autocrat is very threatened by that. But a transformational leader says, hey, wait a minute. Hey, this is important. So they flip the org chart upside down and they recognize that they don't know enough. And they rely on those people that are below them on the org chart to influence, to provide them insight. They welcome it. They encourage it.
Yeah.
So you can only do that if you can empathize. If you're really insecure and you have people, I got team members that I work with in my business that are so much smarter and so much knowledgeable than I am on their particular level of expertise. I welcome that. They tell me, Joe, we need to do this. Hey, yeah, I get it. You're the one with this expertise and let's go do that. They need my support. They need point them in the right direction, but I don't have to tell them what to do. They know exactly what they're doing.
Right, man. And that's another great sign of a leader that relies on or looks for the smarter folks. And I've seen leaders who are the ones that, no, I know it all. I'm the smartest person in the room, right? So, and that's not going to go far. You flip it, I am the one connecting the dots and empowering and bringing those things to light to help them be better, right? Help us with the mission, right? So coming back to the military side of the fence, if you don't mind, I'm curious because everything is mission driven, right? I mean, we're talking about life and death situations at time, right? So there's a reason that you have the hierarchical structure, right? But then from a leadership perspective, top down, you've said you've trained a lot of those folks, which is great. And I'm just trying to understand it a little bit better. You've seen some changes as you've, especially when it comes to decision making, right? How does leading with empathy and impactful decision makers in kind of that interaction happens? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's because I call them executives, but the senior officers in the military, they need to understand. They need to understand what's happening.
Right.
And I know you're going to ask me what my favorite quote is later on, but I'll say it now. Stephen Covey said, and I'm paraphrasing, to be understood, you must seek to understand.
Yeah.
And good leaders will do that. Hey, I need to understand what's happening. So they'll rely on their lower levels or the folks that are below them to give them that insight. But you mentioned mission, which is really important. It's the executives or the senior officers who have to manage those boundaries. And one of the problems that, whether it's military or corporate or anything, one of the problems I think is scope creep. Well, that's a project management term, but mission creep.
Right.
And now here's where the executive really adds value, is to be able to say, well, wait a minute. I understand your perspective, but that's out of our mission. Let's focus on our mission. Let's get your insight based upon our mission. If we tiptoe too far out of that, we're going to lose control of what truly we're supposed to accomplish. And I believe that's another role of you're showing empathy, but you're also putting boundaries around it, or else you'll just
Yeah.
spend. This is one of the problems the government has had over the years. I think they're getting better. I think they're better at it, but staying on focus, staying on mission. Let's not build roads if it's not our mission to build roads. Let DOT build the roads, right? Our job is to build the building or whatever it is. So an
Right.
executive can provide that. Am I addressing your questions or what?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, and I love that the answer, and then and again, is understanding and instruction, not allowing that to go beyond what's needed. So that definitely hits the mark.
And I think the team members aren't in touch with that and shouldn't be in touch with that as much as the executives or the senior officers or whoever. That's what they should be in touch. This is where good technical people will go wild. I've had technical folks call me and say, "Hey, Joe, the customer wants A, B, and C. So, hey, I promised them we would do it." And I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, hey." And I would thank them and say, "Look, hey, I appreciate you providing that insight." So I'm trying to empathize. I appreciate you providing that insight to the customer. And it's clear to me that you understand even before they understand what they need.
Right.
And I appreciate that. But I have to throw a big but into that. But we got to determine who's going to pay for this because they didn't purchase it. It's out of scope. And granted, they need it. So my job as the leader is to say, "Hey, look, I appreciate it. This is a great idea. I agree with you. It's a great idea. But let's manage the process a little bit better. When you have these great ideas, come to me. Let's you and I explore it together. Then let's determine what is it going to cost? How's the impact going to be on our due dates? Remember, this client is also pushing us to get the job done. How do we want to best present it?" I've had clients call me and say, "Hey, Joe, Bill just gave me this. He said you can do this." And I'm like, "Oh, God." And I got to deal with, now I got to be the bearer of bad news that it's going to cost you $10,000. That's because it's out of scope. So part of a leader's job is to set the boundaries, make sure everybody is following the processes and the procedures, and then allowing them to be creative.
Yeah. You brought up a good point because, we do a lot of work on the government, but also on the commercial. And the commercial tends to be a little more shorter project-based type of things, right? But that sometimes scope creep can come in, especially in the firm fixed price contracts, right? Where the customer say, "Well, we got A, B, C, and D to be delivered." But then we're like, "But there's an E in there," right? And our technical people are like excited. We're like, we're kind leaders, we customer's always right. And they're like, "We can deliver it," right? And in the past, we've lacked the accountability and the balancing act. So we have a strong project manager. When I say strong, he's also a kind leader, but creates that boundary. You keep saying boundaries and everything, right, in your descriptions. And identifying that boundary, it's critical in many things because the minute you allow that boundary to go away or it's not there, it's not going to be a win-win environment anymore or scenario, right? It's
Then the boundary stops existing.
Yeah, right. And the customer is now expecting that rather than understanding what it takes. We're coming in as experts to deliver X, Y, and Z, right? And they're like, "Oh, well, this is part of it." So it's communication, accountability also on both ends, and making sure that we understanding where we're coming from, and you can communicate that properly without emotions coming into play, right?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, yes. And let me add to that too, is my experience is when you set those boundaries with customers, and you can still be a kind leader. You can still be transformational.
Yeah.
You can still look out for their best interests, both the employees and the customers. But when you set those boundaries, then you go to the customer and say, "Hey, look, E is a little out of scope here. And I'm sorry, granted you need it, but here's what it's going to cost." My experience is that when you set that, 9 out of 10 customers are going to respect that.
Absolutely.
They want to buy and they want to pay for what they bought and agreed to pay for. And you're like leading them on. You're the adult in the room. You're saying, "Look, you can't have everything you want, but we will deliver everything you need and everything you requested. And my experience, especially with the government wants us to succeed. And they have no problem paying for what they requested. It's like a running back. If they find that hole and they run through it, right, they're gonna score. And they're going to score over and over again. So you set fair boundaries, you set fair pricing. And if you're in a position where you have to give something away to a client, make sure they understand, hey, I'm going to give this to you, right?
Yeah.
Can I share a story to me that happened?
Yeah, please.
Years ago, I was running a very small project with a client in New Orleans. I think it was USDA. It's been 30 years. But so the client asked this very simple project. I was working for a company and we installed service assurance software products into their IT environment. So we send a guy to New Orleans. He's there on Monday. It was like a 4-day job. He was there on Monday. Client calls me up and says, hey, Joe, can you get down here? Because we want to provide formal acceptance of the project so you guys can get paid. So I fly down to New Orleans and we sat in front of the screen and we flipped the screen and just to accept the product. And 3/4 of the way through there, she says to me, hey, Joe, we'd really like this report. Is it possible you guys could add this report? And I told her, I said, yeah. I said, that's not going to be too complicated. But I said, can you get a change order through? And she says, change order, it was like $5,000 or something for the change. And she says, can you get this change order through? And I said that. And she says, I don't know. So I said, hey, I'm a good guy. I'm a kind leader. Right. I'm a servant. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Her name was Marianne. I'll never forget. I said, Marianne, here's what I'm going to do for you. Since my guy is already here and he's implementing, and I don't want him to fly back to New Orleans 2 weeks later, have to charge you again for the travel. Right. So here's what I'm going to go ahead and let him do this change. Right. He'll keep him here. He'll leave Friday. He already talked to him. He said, I can do this in about 4 hours, 5 hours. So I can give you this. And she said, oh, great, Joe. So we did it. They loved it. I loved it. The technical guy, he loved it. It worked great. Everybody's happy. Right. So I'm thinking, okay, we're home free. I made $5,000 for the company. Right. So I get a call 3 weeks later from the contract officer. And she says, Joe, we were expecting an invoice of this much. And I know you did some additional work. And she said, did you do this work already? And I said, yeah. And I did a song and dance with her. And I said, look, I didn't want the guy to come back. I didn't want him to charge the government for more travel. And she said to me, you do this again to me. She says, I'm going to go ahead and pay you. But if you do this again to me, you just gave it to the government for free. Right. So here's the lesson learned that I took from it. The lesson learned, number one, is, I don't know if you probably know this because you do government work, but you know, when the government commits to paying, say, $30,000 and they obligate that, they can only pay 30. And if and if you invoice them for 35 and say that money is not available, that procurement office he or she can go to jail. For cutting checks more than the government obligated. And that's what she was telling me, Joe, I'm not going to jail for you. So what I learned was it's good to help people. It's good to make a difference, but following the process that positions everybody to benefit is the best way. Now, she had money. She shifted money around. The procurement people in the government are really good at this. In a good way. I mean, they shift money. This contract didn't need that much money. Let's shift it to Joe's contract and we'll get him paid. And then I'm going to slap Joe with the ruler, which she did. And I learned a valuable lesson about managing change and balancing that with being a good guy.
Absolutely. No, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. And I'm sure a lot of audiences being in this DC area could benefit from that, right? Because she didn't have to pay, right? But she did, right? This one time, and the scope creep is critical, and change requests are most critical too. And don't do as much as you think is a nice thing to do, right? There's still a lot of legalities and a lot of things that you have, whether it's government, commercial, doesn't matter, right? It's still gotta you gotta really manage that properly. So thank
And
you
I
for
think
that.
she understood that my heart was in the right place, but the rules and regulations bucked heads with being in the right mindset. So in retrospect, I would have said, hey, look, we can't do it without a change
Yeah,
order, period. Sorry.
100%.
I want to help
Right.
you, but
Yeah.
so
So thanks for sharing that. So going into the next phase here, we have this segment called Flip the Mic, which I allow our guests to ask me a question. So I don't know if you have a question in
yeah,
mind for me.
I do, because I know you're into this and you and I have some shared background. So tell me how do you practice this? And how do you in your company, because I know you run a fairly sizable consulting firm, and I know you do DoD work. So how do you manage your people, and how do you lead your teams in this concept? And what does it mean to you to be
That's
a
a great
kind leader? How's that?
Multiple questions there. You only get one, Joe. Come on now.
All right, let me rephrase it. How are you a kind leader?
No. I'll answer the other one. The way we do things here is I would consider myself a kind individual, always, really looking out for folks. And it's sometimes early in my career, right? People took advantage of that, right? Oh, this guy's too nice, right? And I'm very trusting first, right? Like I'm always going to just come in and trust somebody. That's just who I am, right? Because I have that mindset of the world is here for me to learn and experience. The minute somebody does something or I feel like they're not very genuine or I nicely cut that out of my life because we don't need that, right? And it's just going to create more negativity. So as I've created training material because you have to train. It can't just be, hey, be a kind leader. Every guest has the different description and definition from their perspective. But how do we want to build it? How do I want to build it within the organization? So we've defined that internally. We've provided some training the leaders of the organization, as well as training down to the front lines. And this is something actually new that I've done this year. After doing this podcast for about a year and a half now, it got me thinking, well, all these definitions of kind leaders, what is our definition internally, right? So we just kicked off a training. I put together a lot of the training, and that is how we've been able to build that out right now and building the culture. You said something earlier about having your business and you defining the culture, and instead of the culture being defined by itself, right? So as a leader out there, I want to make sure that I'm defining it, obviously with collaboration with other leaders in the organization, but we define it, we drive it, we build it, right? So that's how we've been able to do, and we're evolving, right? I'm just because we set it like this for this year, we evaluate it, and then how can we continue to evolve at the end of the day? What are some of the things that we can tweak or build or improve to enhance? Because if we're not learning, we're not living, and that's my a thing that I love saying, right? And even to my kids, I was like, you gotta, just because you're done with school when you graduate college or high school or whatever, doesn't mean you stop learning. You gotta constantly be learning it all so you can provide that and continue to grow and evolve as a human,
Exactly.
right? In this world.
I look at it too, that cultures really come from the top.
Yep.
It sounds kind of cliche, but it truly does. And another story that the company I worked for before I started PME, I had an instant. Now I'm like you. I mean, I like to engage with people. I need lots of input. One particular time I was in a meeting. I was running the PMO, and I had about 5 or 6 project managers that reported to me. And I was trying to implement a new process on how we were going to manage our projects together. And so at that particular meeting, my boss, the vice president, decided he was going to sit through the meeting, which I thought was a little bit strange, but okay. I mean, I report to him, he's welcome to the meeting. So we sat through the meeting and we were discussing this process. And I was going around the room and I was telling people, tell me what you think. Is this going to work? I'd been in the company for about 6 months, and some of those people had been in the company like 7 years. And I'm going around the room asking for insight.
Yeah.
And one particular person she was really banging her sin. I thanked her and I said, okay, now I want to know what, Bill has to say.
Right.
And my vice president shot me a look like, what are you doing? He didn't say this, but he shot me a look like this. And I pulled him aside after the meeting and I said, what's going on? I said, that look didn't feel comfortable to me.
Right.
And he didn't want to talk about it, but I basically cornered him. I said, look, we're going to talk about this. And his answer was, Joe, you're a senior director in this company. You make the policy, not them. You don't need their input. Show the leadership. You do what you think is right, regardless of what they think. And I was like, whoa. See, he was very transactional. I was very transformational. And I left that meeting thinking, hey, what's wrong with me? What did I do? And I couldn't, and I realized it was just a difference of styles. And I didn't last in that company very long, quite honestly, and I said, I just can't be a part of this top-down style.
Right. And that's not enough for growth, right? Really, at the end of the day, is that helping others to grow, become the better version of themselves. That's a big motto for me.
We're on the top of the pyramid, and we need to represent the pyramid the right way.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for that great story there. So going to the rapid fire questions here, what's one book every leader should read?
I thought about this before we got on, and I'll tell you one of my favorite books, and it's really not a business book as much as it is but I think there's a lot of leadership in it, is Born Again by Chuck Colson. And let me put some context around this. Chuck Colson was one of Richard Nixon's White House attorneys, and during the Watergate issues. And Chuck Colson was an attorney, and he did some very shady things to destroy some people's reputations. And he was actually arrested and indicted along with a number of Richard Nixon's White House cronies. And he came to the realization as he was going through preparing for his trial he realizes that he had missed the boat, that in that administration, he was more about destroying rather than building. And it has a very Christian bent to it, but it's a great historical read because it's about the Nixon administration, how he handled it, and he actually, in the middle of his trial, he realized that he didn't want to be this person, and that the way he was destroying and not building was not the way he wanted to be. And he actually pleaded guilty in the middle of his trial.
Oh, man.
He pleaded guilty and said, look, I got to take whatever's coming to me because this was bad. This was wrong. Yeah. And he thought he was going to get off with a slap, maybe probation, but he actually served 6 months in jail. And since then, he had a transformation. He built this, you might have heard of Prison Fellowship. Prison Fellowship is an organization, it's a nonprofit that helps prisoners, find their way through Christianity. They do things like they buy Christmas gifts for their children, and they really help prisoners and ex-prisoners and the whole bit. So he changed his life from being a hard-nosed attorney that was destroying people's reputation to rebuilding it to doing something very positive. I really liked that book from a leadership perspective because you go from very transactional. He says, I supported everything Nixon did. I was going to do whatever it took, from being transactional to being transformational. So I really like that book.
Beautiful.
There are other books that I've read.
Perfect. So the next two questions that I have is, what's a leadership quote or mantra that you live by?
Well, I told that to you. It's Stephen Covey said, to be understood, we must seek to understand. Basically what he's saying, if you have your thinking, you have your philosophy, your beliefs, work to understand somebody else's. Because when you listen, when you're actively listening to people and seeking to understand, they're more apt to understand what you have to say and what you believe. And I like that, especially when we're dealing with clients.
Beautiful. If you could have coffee with any leader, past or present, who would it be and why?
Well, I don't know if this classifies as but my mother, right? My mother died
Okay.
in
Yeah.
1999. And, she was a very quiet person. She wasn't a person that stood on the mountaintop. You need to do this. You need to do that. That was
Yeah.
more my father. But my mother was the type of person that she listened well. She worked to understand all 7 of her children, right?
Oh my
She
goodness.
worked to
Wow.
understand their uniqueness in their own way. And yeah, I'd like to have coffee with her and just say, hey, how do you think I did? you know?
Yeah, that'd be an amazing conversation for sure. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. So it's been a great conversation, Joe, and I appreciate all the stories and insights that you provided. So where can our audience find you?
Well, projectmanagementexperts.com. We provide not only project management training, but we also provide over 300 self-paced courses that are everything from management, marketing, leadership, a whole bunch of topics that people can take.
Nice.
And my email is JD as in David, LAUNI at projectmanagementexperts.com.
Perfect. And I'm sure you're in all LinkedIn as well. I think we've connected
Oh,
there
yes.
as well. So excellent.
LinkedIn, Facebook, the whole bit.
What's a final message you want to leave our audience with?
Wow. Final message. I think it's to open our minds, create cultures that encourage people. And I say people, I don't mean just employees, but customers to learn and grow and to stop overthinking profitability and revenue. That has to be there. But I look at, let's drop a pebble into the pond, and that pebble will have a ripple effect throughout the pond. Not just the stone, but we want to create ripples in our society. That's how society learns and grows. And let's think more broader when we're running our businesses.
Beautiful. Well, Joe, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your, stories. What a perspective! I love your perspective from leading with empathy from a project management. A lot of people that I've interviewed in the past have been just different industries, different types. You're the first one that is coming in from a project management and kind of creating that boundary and driving communication and leading with empathy is very important. So I appreciate everything you provided. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. I think it's a great thing you're doing. I wish you the best of luck. Keep doing it.
Appreciate it. And to our audience, thank you for listening to the Kind Leader Podcast. And remember, be kind, bring value, rise together. Have an amazing day.